Welcome to Her True Stories. Before we dive into today's story, I want you to understand something. This isn't just about Christmas gifts. This is about the moment when someone pushes a woman too far, when they mistake her silence for weakness, when they think age has made her powerless. If you've ever been dismissed, laughed at, or told you're too dramatic for having feelings, this story will resonate in your bones. And if anyone has ever made you feel invisible because of your age, well, you're about to see what happens when they realize just how visible you can make yourself. So settle in, because you're about to witness what happens when someone underestimates a woman who has nothing left to lose and everything to prove. This is Imelda's story, and trust me, the gift she gives herself will leave you speechless. But first, if you're new to Her True Stories, welcome to the channel where we celebrate women who refuse to disappear quietly. Hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell, because these are the stories that will change how you see the world. Now, let's begin. My name is Imelda Moriarty, and at 59, I discovered that the cruelest wounds are inflicted not by strangers, but by the children you raised with your own hands. Christmas Eve had always been sacred in our family. For 34 years, since my son Daniel was born, I had orchestrated every detail of our celebration with the precision of a conductor leading a symphony. The dining room gleamed with my grandmother's silver, the tree sparkled with ornaments collected across decades, and the scent of roasted turkey filled every corner of my home. I sat at the head of my mahogany dining table, watching my family exchange gifts with the enthusiasm I had worked so hard to cultivate. My long gray hair was swept into an elegant chignon, secured with the pearl-tipped pins that had belonged to my mother. I wore my midnight blue velvet dress, the one that brought out my eyes, and my grandmother's three-strand pearl necklace, the one that caught the candlelight and reminded everyone present that I was still beautiful, still relevant, still the matriarch of this family. Daniel, my 34-year-old son, tore through his presents with boyish enthusiasm despite his expensive suit and Rolex watch. His wife, Vanessa, 32 and sharp as cut glass, opened her gifts with calculated grace, her blonde hair perfectly styled even at the end of a long day. Their children, my 8-year-old grandson Marcus and 10-year-old granddaughter Lily, squealed with delight over each new toy and gadget. I had spent months selecting the perfect gifts for each of them. Daniel received the vintage scotch he'd been coveting, along with a leather portfolio embossed with his initials. Vanessa got the designer handbag she'd been hinting about for weeks, plus matching jewelry. The children were spoiled with toys, books, and games chosen specifically for their interests. As the wrapping paper mountain grew and the excitement reached its peak, I waited for someone to remember that I, too, was part of this celebration. Waited for the moment when grateful eyes would turn to me, when someone would hand me a carefully wrapped package and thank me for the love I had poured into their gifts. The waiting stretched into minutes, then longer. "Well," I said finally, my voice light but carrying an edge I couldn't quite suppress, "I suppose it's time for my gifts now." The room fell silent except for the crackling of the fire and the soft jazz playing in the background. Four pairs of eyes looked at me with expressions ranging from confusion to mild annoyance. Vanessa was the first to speak, her voice dripping with a kind of false sweetness that barely concealed contempt. "Oh my goodness, Imelda. We must have missed it somehow. I'm so sorry." She didn't look sorry. She looked like someone who had just realized they'd forgotten to feed the cat, mildly inconvenienced but not particularly concerned. "Missed it," I repeated carefully. "Your gift," Vanessa continued, her tone becoming more animated as she warmed to her performance. "It must have gotten lost in all the chaos. You know how crazy Christmas morning can be, but this was Christmas Eve, and there had been no chaos. Everything had been perfectly organized, just as I had planned it, just as I always planned it." Daniel looked up from examining his new scotch, his expression shifting from confusion to irritation. Mom, honestly, you're being dramatic. We're all adults here. Do we really need to make a big production about every little thing? A little thing? The words came out sharper than I intended. Yes, a little thing. It's just Christmas presents. We forgot, okay? It happens. He waved his hand dismissively, the gesture of a man accustomed to having his word be final. Besides, Mom, you're 59 years old. Don't you think you're a bit too old to be creating drama over silly gifts? The words hit me like a physical blow. Too old. Creating drama. Silly gifts. And then they laughed. Not cruel, cackling laughter, but something worse. The kind of indulgent chuckling adults share when a child says something amusing. The kind of laughter that dismisses and diminishes, that reduces a person to background noise. Vanessa covered her mouth with her hand, but her eyes sparkled with mirth. Daniel shook his head with that tolerant smile he'd inherited from his father. Even the children giggled, following their parents' lead without understanding the devastation they were inflicting. I sat there in my beautiful dress and my mother's pearls, surrounded by the Christmas magic I had created single-handedly, and felt myself disappearing. Not just ignored, but erased. Made invisible by the very people I had sacrificed everything to love and nurture and protect. You're right, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. I suppose I am too old for such things. I rose from my chair with the grace that had been trained into me since childhood, smoothing my velvet dress and checking that my pearls lay properly. If you'll excuse me, I think I'll retire for the evening. Please continue enjoying your gifts. Mom, don't be like this, Daniel called after me, but his tone suggested he was more annoyed by my departure than concerned about my feelings. I'm not being like anything, sweetheart. I'm simply taking your advice about acting my age. I walked upstairs to my bedroom with measured steps, my spine straight and my head high. Behind me, I could hear the conversation resume, their voices light and carefree, as if nothing had happened, as if I had never been there at all. In my bedroom, I sat on the edge of my four-poster bed and stared at my reflection in the antique mirror across the room. The woman looking back at me was still beautiful, high cheekbones, clear skin, intelligent eyes the color of winter moss. My figure was maintained through years of yoga and careful eating, my style impeccable even in my private moments. I was not invisible. I was not irrelevant. I was not too old for anything. I poured myself 3 fingers of the Macallan 25 I kept in my bedroom for special occasions and walked to my window. Below, I could see Daniel's black BMW SUV in my driveway, the one he was so proud of, the one that announced his success to the world. Success built on the foundation I had provided, education I had funded, opportunities one had created through my connections and my sacrifice. Too old, I whispered to my reflection in the window, my breath fogging the glass. Too dramatic. Silly gifts. I finished my scotch and felt something cold and sharp settling in my chest, replacing the hurt with something far more dangerous. If they thought I was too old to matter, too dramatic to take seriously, too irrelevant to remember, well, perhaps it was time to remind them exactly what they had chosen to forget. Perhaps it was time to get myself a gift they would never, ever be able to ignore. If you've ever been told you're too old to start over, let me tell you, that's a lie. Your story isn't over, and you still have chapters left to write. Our best-selling book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, is filled with simple, powerful steps to help you heal, rebuild, and fall in love with life again. Click the link in the description box and start your new beginning today. And if this story is already making your heart race, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. Have you ever been made to feel invisible by your own family? Your stories matter to me, and they might inspire our next video. I didn't sleep that Christmas Eve night. Instead, I sat in my study until dawn, surrounded by photo albums and memories, reconstructing the architecture of my betrayal. The study had been my husband's domain when he was alive, but in the 5 years since his death, I had made it my own. Dark wood paneling, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and a massive oak desk that had belonged to my grandfather. It was a room that demanded respect, a room where important decisions were made. I pulled out the family albums and spread them across the Persian rug like evidence in a trial. Here was Daniel at 5, gap-toothed and grinning as I helped him build a sandcastle. Here he was at 8, clutching my hand on his first day of school, tears in his eyes until I promised to be waiting when he got home. At 12, awkward and gangly, trusting me to help him navigate the cruelties of middle school. Every birthday party I had planned, every scraped knee I had bandaged, every nightmare I had chased away, every sacrifice I had made to ensure his happiness, his success, his future. When his father died suddenly of a heart attack, leaving us both devastated, who had held Daniel while he cried, who had managed the funeral arrangements, the legal complications, the emotional wreckage, who had put her own grief aside to make sure a 19-year-old boy could continue his education, pursue his dreams, build the life he wanted.
Me.
Always me. Only me. And when he brought Vanessa home 3 years ago, announcing their engagement with a kind of breathless excitement reserved for life-changing revelations, who had welcomed her with open arms, who had planned their engagement party, helped with wedding arrangements, opened her home and her heart to a woman who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to overcome. The photos told the story of my gradual erasure. In the early pictures with Vanessa, I was prominently featured. The proud mother-in-law, the family matriarch, the woman who had raised such a successful son. But as the images progressed chronologically, I began to move toward the edges of frames, my smile becoming more forced, my presence less central. By the wedding photos, I was barely visible in most shots. I found the album from last Christmas and studied it carefully. There I was, beautifully dressed as always, sitting at my own dining table in my own home, looking like a guest at someone else's party. Daniel and Vanessa dominated every photo, their children nestled between them, while I appeared in the background like expensive wallpaper. When had I stopped being the center of my own life? When had I allowed myself to become a supporting character in the story I had written? I closed the albums and walked to my bathroom, studying my reflection in the mirror above the antique vanity. The woman looking back at me was undeniably striking. My skin was smooth and luminous thanks to a lifetime of careful skincare and good genetics. My gray hair was thick and lustrous, silvering naturally in a way that added rather than detracted from my beauty. My figure was trim and elegant, maintained through discipline and pride. I was not a woman who deserved to be dismissed. I was not a relic to be tolerated. I was not too old for anything except perhaps tolerance of disrespect. Silly gifts, I murmured to my reflection, remembering the casual cruelty in Daniel's voice. As if 34 years of Christmas mornings meant nothing. As if the months I spent selecting perfect presents was just empty sentimentality. As if I was just a foolish old woman clinging to outdated traditions. But it hadn't been about the gifts themselves, had it? It had been about being seen, being valued, being remembered by the people who should have remembered me most. I returned to my study and sat at the desk, pulling out a legal pad and my favorite fountain pen. At the top of the page, I wrote gift ideas in my careful script. What kind of gift did one give to people who had everything they wanted but had forgotten everything that mattered? What kind of gift did one give to people who had decided you were too old to deserve consideration? What kind of gift did one give to people who laughed at your pain? I began to write, my pen moving smoothly across the paper as ideas took shape. Some gifts were meant to bring joy. Others were meant to teach lessons. And some were meant to ensure that certain moments were never, ever forgotten. As the sun rose on Christmas morning, painting my study in shades of gold and amber, I realized that I had never felt more awake, more focused, more purposeful in my life. Daniel thought I was too old to create drama over silly gifts. He was about to discover just how dramatically creative a 59-year-old woman could be when she finally decided to stop being polite and start being memorable. The gift I was planning for myself and for them would be anything but silly. It would be perfect. Boxing Day arrived gray and cold, matching my mood as I began what I privately called my research phase. While the rest of the world nursed hangovers and returned unwanted gifts, I settled into my study with my laptop, several notepads, and a pot of strong coffee. If I was going to give myself the perfect gift, it needed to be planned with the same meticulous attention to detail I had once devoted to Daniel's birthday parties and Christmas mornings. Nothing left to chance. Nothing that could be traced back to me. Nothing that would rob me of the satisfaction of watching their realization dawn. I started with the internet, searching for what I told myself were research purposes. Household accidents. Mechanical failures. The kind of tragic incidents that happen to families every day, sudden, shocking, but ultimately explainable. My browser history became a catalog of possibility. Carbon monoxide poisoning, electrical fires, brake failures, gas leaks, staircase accidents. Each article I read was filed away in my mind like a recipe card, noting the methods, the telltale signs investigators looked for, the ways these tragedies could be prevented or facilitated. Daniel's pride and joy was that black BMW SUV parked in my driveway every time they visited. He had spent 20 minutes on Christmas Eve detailing its features to anyone who would listen, the advanced safety systems, the premium everything, the symbol of his success. German engineering, he had boasted, built to last. But even German engineering had vulnerabilities. I pulled out my laptop and began researching automotive safety recalls, brake systems, and the subtle ways mechanical failures could manifest. Amazing what one could learn from automotive forums and repair manuals freely available online. Amazing how many ways sophisticated machinery could develop problems. By afternoon, I had filled 3 pages with careful notes. Not plans, not yet, but possibilities. Options. The foundation of what could become something much more concrete. I took a break to prepare tea, using my finest china and my grandmother's silver service. Some rituals deserve to be maintained, even during times of transition. Especially during times of transition. I carried the tray to my study and continued my work. The notebook I was keeping looked innocuous enough, just careful script detailing various mechanical systems and their failure points. To anyone casually glancing at it, it might have been research for a novel or academic curiosity about automotive safety. Nothing that suggested anything more sinister than intellectual interest. But I knew what it really was, a gift list of sorts. The kind of gift that would ensure no one in my family ever again forgot that I was a force to be reckoned with. My phone rang at 3 o'clock, interrupting my concentration. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. "Hello, sweetheart," I answered, my voice warm and maternal. "Hey, Mom. Listen, I wanted to apologize about last night." "Apologize for what?" "You know, the gift thing. Vanessa reminded me that we probably hurt your feelings."
Probably.
As if there was any doubt about the impact of their cruelty. "That's very thoughtful of you both," I said carefully. "So we were thinking, maybe we could take you out to dinner this week? Make it up to you? There's this new steakhouse downtown that's supposed to be amazing." A dinner. A public meal at a restaurant where their generosity would be visible to strangers, where they could feel magnanimous about including the lonely widow in their busy lives. How perfectly predictable. That sounds lovely, Daniel. But you know what? I was actually hoping we could do something at my house instead. Maybe next weekend? I could cook that roast you used to love when you were little. Mom, you don't have to go to all that trouble. It's no trouble at all. I miss cooking for family. And it would be so nice to have everyone here together again. Proper family time. I could hear him discussing it with Vanessa in the background, their voices muffled but audible. She wasn't enthusiastic. I caught words like boring and obligation, but Daniel was apparently feeling guilty enough to override her objections.
Okay, Mom.
Next Saturday work? Say around 6. Perfect. I'll make all your favorites.
Great.
And Mom? Thanks for being so understanding about everything. Understanding. What a wonderfully loaded word. Of course, sweetheart. Family forgives. Family always forgives. After I hung up, I sat in my study smiling for the first time since Christmas Eve. They thought they were managing me, accommodating the hurt feelings of a dramatic old woman with a dinner invitation motivated by guilt. They had no idea they had just accepted an invitation to receive the gift I was planning for myself. I returned to my notebook and began a new page, this one headed Menu Planning. But the items I was listing weren't courses for dinner. They were steps in a process that would culminate in the most memorable evening my family had ever experienced. By the time I finished writing, the winter sun had set and my study was bathed in lamplight. I closed the notebook and locked it in my desk drawer, the key going into my jewelry box beside my mother's pearl earrings. Some gifts required patience to perfect. Some gifts took time to plan properly. And some gifts were worth waiting for, because the recipient's reaction would make every moment of preparation worthwhile. I had 6 days to finalize the details. 6 days to ensure that when Daniel and Vanessa saw what I had gotten for myself, they would never, ever forget it. 6 days to transform their casual cruelty into the greatest regret of their lives. The planning phase was complete. Now came the real work. The week passed in a blur of preparation that felt remarkably similar to my usual party planning, except this time the celebration was entirely for my own benefit. I threw myself into the arrangements with the kind of focused energy I hadn't felt in years. On Tuesday, I visited the market to select ingredients for Saturday's dinner, playing the role of the gracious hostess to perfection. The butcher recommended his finest prime rib, the baker set aside fresh dinner rolls, the wine merchant helped me choose bottles that would pair beautifully with the meal. To anyone watching, I was simply a sophisticated woman planning an elegant family dinner, which, in a way, I was. Wednesday was spent on what I called venue preparation. I cleaned my house with the attention to detail usually reserved for magazine photo shoots, polishing silver until it gleamed, arranging flowers in crystal vases, ensuring every surface reflected the kind of elegant perfection that had once made Daniel proud to bring friends home. The dining room received special attention. I wanted it to look exactly as it had on Christmas Eve, beautiful, welcoming, the setting for what should have been a perfect family celebration. The scene of their crime, restored to its former glory. Thursday brought the more delicate aspects of my preparation. I had spent considerable time researching the BMW's maintenance schedule and had discovered that Daniel was meticulous about following it to the letter. His service records, which he kept in the glove compartment with typical German precision, showed his last brake inspection had been just 3 months ago. Perfect. No one would question a sudden mechanical failure in a vehicle that had been recently certified as safe. I had also spent time in my late husband's workshop, reacquainting myself with tools I hadn't touched in years. My hands remembered more than I had expected. The muscle memory of helping him with various household repairs came flooding back, along with the confidence that I could handle delicate mechanical adjustments without leaving obvious fingerprints of my involvement. Friday evening, I called Daniel to confirm the details for our dinner. Everything's all set for tomorrow, I told him, my voice bright with anticipation. I've planned such a special evening for us. That's great, Mom. The kids are really excited about it. And Vanessa? She's looking forward to it too, he lied smoothly. You know how much she appreciates your cooking. I smiled to myself. I'm so glad. I want this to be an evening none of us ever forget. I'm sure it will be memorable. If only he knew how right he was. Saturday arrived crisp and clear, the kind of winter day that made everything look sharp and defined. I spent the morning in final preparations, moving through my routine with the calm efficiency of someone who had planned everything down to the smallest detail. The roast went into the oven at precisely 2 o'clock. The table was set with my finest china and crystal, the goods silver polished to mirror brightness. Candles waited to be lit, wine waited to be opened, and every detail spoke of love and care and family tradition. At 4 o'clock, I took my tools to the garage. Daniel always parked in the same spot when he visited, the left side of my two-car garage, positioned so Vanessa could exit without having to walk around the vehicle. Predictable as always, a creature of habit who never questioned his assumptions about safety and security. I had studied the brake system extensively over the past week, and I knew exactly what needed to be done. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would be immediately obvious. Just a small adjustment that would become critical at precisely the wrong moment. Working with careful precision, I made the necessary modifications. It was surprisingly simple, really. A matter of knowing which connections were essential and which could be compromised without immediate detection. The beauty of the plan was its elegant simplicity. When the failure occurred, investigators would find evidence of mechanical malfunction, genuine where that had developed naturally over time, combined with the kind of sudden failure that occasionally happened even in the best-maintained vehicles. No evidence of tampering. No suggestion of intentional sabotage. Just the kind of tragic accident that made headlines for a day and then faded into the background noise of random misfortune. By 5:30, I was back in my kitchen, the final touches being added to our family dinner. I had changed into a burgundy silk dress that complemented my pearls perfectly, applied my makeup with extra care, and arranged my hair in the style that had always made Daniel tell me I looked beautiful. I wanted to look my absolute best for the gift I was giving myself. At 6 o'clock sharp, I heard the familiar sound of Daniel's BMW pulling into my driveway. Through the kitchen window, I watched them all pile out of the vehicle, Daniel in his expensive cashmere coat, Vanessa in designer boots that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, the children bundled in their matching winter outfits. My family, my ungrateful, dismissive, cruel family who had decided I was too old to matter and too dramatic to take seriously. They had no idea they were walking into the most important evening of their lives. No idea that the gift I had chosen for myself was waiting patiently in their perfectly maintained German-engineered safety system. No idea that by the end of the night, they would understand exactly what happened when you made the mistake of thinking Imelda Moriarty was just a silly old woman who could be ignored. I smoothed my dress, checked my pearls in the hallway mirror, and opened the front door with the warmest smile I could manage. "Welcome to our special evening," I said, embracing each of them in turn. "I'm so glad you could all make it." The irony was exquisite. They had come to humor me, to assuage their guilt about Christmas Eve, to endure an evening with the dramatic old woman who needed to be managed. Instead, they had come to receive the most unforgettable gift I could possibly give them. The only question now was whether they would survive long enough to fully appreciate it. Dinner proceeded exactly as I had orchestrated it, with the kind of surface perfection that had once been my specialty. The roast was tender and perfectly seasoned, the wine complemented each course beautifully, and the conversation flowed with the forced pleasantness of people determined to prove they were having a good time. Daniel complimented the meal repeatedly, his praise carrying the slightly exaggerated tone of someone overcompensating for previous thoughtlessness. "This is incredible, Mom. I forgot how amazing your cooking is."
Thank you, sweetheart.
I wanted tonight to be special. Vanessa made appropriate sounds of appreciation while checking her phone whenever she thought I wasn't looking. The children ate with the focused intensity of people presented with food far superior to their usual fare, though they kept asking when they could be excused to play with their electronic devices. I played my role to perfection. The gracious hostess, the loving mother and grandmother, the woman so grateful for this opportunity to reconnect with her family. Every smile was carefully calibrated, every gesture designed to reinforce their assumption that I was a harmless old woman who just wanted to feel relevant again. "This wine is excellent," Daniel said, swirling his glass with the kind of practiced motion he'd learned from watching too many movies about sophisticated people. "What is it?" "A 2015 Barolo. I've been saving it for a special occasion." "What makes tonight so special?" Vanessa asked, and for a moment, her mask slipped enough to reveal genuine curiosity rather than polite interest. I smiled, lifting my own glass in a subtle toast. The chance to spend time with the people I love most, to create new memories together, to give all of us something we'll never forget. "That's sweet, Mom," Daniel said, though I could see him glancing at his watch, already calculating how soon they could politely escape back to their own lives. "You know," I continued, my voice taking on the nostalgic tone they expected from me, "I was looking through old photo albums this week, remembering all our family celebrations over the years. Christmas mornings when you were little, Daniel. Birthday parties. Thanksgiving dinners. We've created so many beautiful memories in this house." "We have," he agreed, but his attention was already drifting toward his phone. "I realized that I've been taking those memories for granted. Taking all of you for granted. And I think maybe you've been taking me for granted too." That got their attention. For pairs of eyes focused on me with varying degrees of wariness. I continued carefully, "Christmas Eve made me realize how easy it is for family members to become invisible to each other, to stop seeing each other clearly." "Mom," Daniel began, his tone carrying a warning. "We apologize for that. We're here now, aren't we?" "You are. And I'm so grateful. But I've been thinking about what you said about me being too old to create drama over silly things. It made me realize that maybe I have been too passive, too willing to accept being overlooked." Vanessa shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Imelda, we didn't mean—" "Oh, but you did mean it," I interrupted gently. "And that's perfectly fine. You were being honest about how you see me. As someone whose feelings don't matter very much. Someone whose needs come last. Someone who should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention she receives." "That's not true," Daniel protested, but the weakness in his voice suggested he knew exactly how true it was. "Isn't it? When was the last time any of you called just to see how I was doing? When was the last time you invited me to something instead of waiting for me to invite you? When was the last time you considered my feelings before making family plans?" The silence that followed was answer enough. "But I've realized something important this week," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "I've realized that I don't have to accept being invisible. I don't have to accept being dismissed. I don't have to accept being treated like a burden instead of a blessing." "Mom, you're not a burden," Daniel started. "Then why do you treat me like one?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a recently extinguished candle. "I've decided," I said, rising from my chair with graceful dignity, "that it's time for me to give myself the gift I should have received for Christmas. The gift of being unforgettable." I moved to the sideboard where I had placed several wrapped packages earlier in the day. "I have something for each of you. A little token of my appreciation for this evening. For this opportunity to clarify where we all stand." I handed Daniel a small, elegantly wrapped box, then one to Vanessa. Smaller packages for the children, who perked up at the unexpected prospect of gifts. "What's this for?" Daniel asked, examining the package suspiciously. "Consider it a parting gift. A memento of our special evening together." "Parting gift?" Vanessa's voice carried a note of alarm. "Open them," I suggested, returning to my seat with the satisfied air of someone who had just completed a particularly difficult task. Daniel unwrapped his package first, revealing a small, ornate picture frame containing a photograph of himself as a 5-year-old, grinning gap-toothed at the camera while I hugged him from behind. His face as he looked at it was a masterpiece of confusion and dawning unease. Vanessa's package contained a similar frame with a photo from their wedding day, one of the few pictures in which I was prominently featured, standing beside them with obvious pride and love. The children's packages held photos of Christmas mornings, birthday parties, family vacations. All moments when I had been central to their happiness, when my presence had mattered, when I had been the one creating the magic they took for granted. I wanted you to have something to remember me by, I explained as they stared at their gifts with growing confusion. Remember you by? Daniel's voice cracked slightly. Mom, what are you talking about? I'm talking about legacy, darling. About the importance of being remembered for who you really are rather than who people assume you to be. I checked my watch with deliberate precision. It's getting late. I'm sure you'll want to get the children home soon. School night tomorrow. Mom, you're scaring me, Daniel said, standing up abruptly. What's going on? Nothing's going on, sweetheart. We've had our special dinner. You've received your gifts, and now it's time for you to go home. Just like any other family evening. But my smile, as I said, it was unlike any smile they had ever seen from me before. It was the smile of a woman who knew exactly what was waiting for them in the garage. The smile of a woman who had finally, definitively, given herself the perfect gift. Can you feel the tension building? Sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones everyone underestimates. If you're on the edge of your seat wondering what Imelda has planned, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. Have you ever been pushed so far that you fantasized about the perfect revenge? And don't forget to subscribe with notifications on, because this story is about to reach its explosive climax. The remainder of dinner passed in a haze of forced normalcy that felt like walking through molasses. Daniel and Vanessa kept exchanging glances heavy with unspoken concern, while I maintained my serene hostess persona with the dedication of a method actress. The dessert is lovely, Grandma, little Lily said, her 10-year-old voice cutting through the tension like a blade. She was always the most perceptive of my grandchildren, the one who noticed when adults were performing rather than simply being.
Thank you, sweetheart.
I made it especially for you. Your favorite, chocolate mousse with fresh berries. It tastes different, she said, tilting her head slightly. Sadder, somehow. Out of the mouths of babes. Even a child could sense that something fundamental had shifted in the atmosphere of my dining room. Lily, don't be silly, Vanessa scolded, but her voice lacked its usual sharp authority. Food doesn't have feelings. Doesn't it? I asked, meeting my granddaughter's eyes across the table. I think Lily understands something important about how emotions affect everything we create, the love or lack thereof that goes into our actions. Mom, Daniel warned, you're being cryptic again. Am I? I thought I was being quite clear. I dabbed my lips with my napkin, a gesture as elegant and final as a curtain falling. Perhaps clarity is simply in the eye of the beholder. Marcus, my 8-year-old grandson, had been quiet throughout most of the meal, focused on his food with the single-minded intensity children reserve for things they truly enjoy. But now he looked up at me with solemn eyes. Grandma, are you sad about Christmas? The question pierced through my careful composure like an arrow finding its mark. Of all the people at this table, the children were the only ones who had shown me genuine concern, genuine awareness of my feelings. I was sad about Christmas, Marcus. But I'm not sad anymore. Why not? Because I've learned something very important. I've learned that sadness can be transformed into something much more powerful when you stop accepting it and start acting on it. What do you mean? Lily asked, her bright eyes fixed on my face with uncomfortable intensity. I mean that sometimes when people hurt you, the best thing you can do is show them exactly what they've lost. Help them understand the consequences of their choices. Daniel's chair scraped against the floor as he shifted nervously. Mom, you're talking in riddles again. Can we just have a normal conversation? This is a normal conversation, darling. Perhaps more normal than any we've had in years. I'm simply being honest about my feelings instead of pretending they don't exist. I rose from my chair and began clearing the dessert plates with the efficient grace of someone who had been hosting family dinners for 3 decades. The children immediately moved to help me, as I had trained them to do from the time they could walk. Let us help you with that, Vanessa said, starting to stand. No need, I replied smoothly. You're my guest tonight. Please just relax and enjoy the wine. I want you to remember this evening exactly as it is, perfect in every detail. As I moved between the dining room and kitchen, carrying plates and gathering silverware, I was acutely aware of the murmured conversation happening at my table. Daniel and Vanessa speaking in low, urgent tones while the children finished their dessert in blissful ignorance of the undercurrents swirling around them. I could catch fragments of their whispered exchange. Acting strange all evening, those weird gifts with the pictures. Should we be worried? Maybe we should go soon?
Perfect.
Let them feel unsettled. Let them sense that something was different about this evening, something significant they couldn't quite identify. Their discomfort was the appetizer to the main course I had planned for them. When I returned to the dining room, carrying a silver coffee service that had belonged to my mother, I found them all watching me with varying degrees of wariness. Coffee, anyone? I have decaf for the children. Actually, Mom, Daniel said, checking his watch with exaggerated casualness, we should probably get going soon. It's a school night and the kids need to get to bed. Of course, I agreed, though my tone carried a note of disappointment that wasn't entirely feigned. I suppose all good things must come to an end. I served coffee to the adults and milk to the children, moving through the ritual with the kind of ceremonial precision that made everyone even more uncomfortable. When I finally sat down with my own cup, I studied each face around my table with the intensity of someone memorizing a scene for posterity. I want to thank you all for coming tonight, I said, my voice carrying the formal weight of a toast. For giving me this opportunity to show you who I really am beneath the surface you've grown so comfortable seeing. Mom, Daniel began, but I held up a gentle hand. Please let me finish. This may be the last time we all sit together like this, and I want to say everything that needs to be said. The silence that greeted this statement was profound and electric. Vanessa, I continued, turning to my daughter-in-law with a smile that was both warm and terrifying. Thank you for showing me so clearly where I stand in this family. Your honesty about my irrelevance has been illuminating. Vanessa's face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. Imelda, I never said you were irrelevant. Not in so many words, perhaps. But actions speak louder than words, don't they? And your actions have been quite eloquent. I turned to Daniel, my only child, the boy I had raised and sacrificed for and loved beyond reason. And Daniel, my darling son, thank you for finally being honest about how you see me. Too old, too dramatic, too silly to deserve consideration. It's freed me from the burden of pretending that wasn't exactly what you thought. That's not what I meant, and you know it, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I turned to Daniel, my only child, the boy I had raised and sacrificed for and loved beyond reason. And Daniel, my darling son, thank you for finally being honest about how you see me. Too old, too dramatic, too silly to deserve consideration. It's freed me from the burden of pretending that wasn't exactly what you thought. That's not what I meant, and you know it, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Then what did you mean when you dismissed my feelings so casually? When you laughed at my pain? When you made it clear that my presence at your celebration was tolerated rather than treasured? The questions hung in the air like accusations, which they were. I continued, my voice growing stronger and more confident with each word, is that tonight you're going to receive the gift I promised myself. The gift of understanding exactly what happens when you underestimate someone you should have cherished. I stood and moved to the window, pulling back the curtain to look out at the driveway where Daniel's BMW sat gleaming under the porch light. Such a beautiful car, I murmured. German engineering at its finest. Built to last, you said. Built to protect the people inside. Why are you talking about my car? Daniel's voice carried a note of genuine alarm now. I turned back to face them, and I could see in their expressions that they were finally beginning to understand that this evening was not what they had assumed it would be. Because, my dear family, your car is going to be the delivery mechanism for the gift I've given myself. The gift of ensuring that none of you ever forget me again. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, marking the seconds until their world changed forever. What have you done? Vanessa whispered, her voice barely audible. I've done what any woman should do when she's been dismissed, diminished, and discarded by the people who should love her most. I've taken control of my own narrative. I smiled at them all with genuine warmth, the kind of maternal affection that had once been the organizing principle of my entire existence. Now then, shall we get you all ready to go home? It's getting late, and you have such a long drive ahead of you. The gift I had given myself was about to be unwrapped, whether they wanted to receive it or not. The transition from dinner to departure took on the surreal quality of a dream sequence, with everyone moving through familiar motions while the air around us crackled with unspoken tension. Daniel helped the children into their coats with unusual urgency, his movements sharp and efficient rather than relaxed. Vanessa gathered her purse and the framed photographs I had given them, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the unexpected mementos. Thank you for dinner, Grandma, Lily said, approaching me for the goodnight hug that was part of our established ritual. As I embraced her, I felt a pang of something that might have been regret if I had allowed myself to feel such weakness. You're very welcome, sweetheart. Remember what I told you about sadness becoming something more powerful? She pulled back to look at me with those perceptive 10-year-old eyes. Will we see you soon? The question pierced through my resolve like a needle finding nerve. For a moment, I wavered, seeing not my ungrateful family, but two innocent children who had done nothing to deserve whatever was about to happen to them. But then I remembered Christmas Eve. The laughter. The casual dismissal. The way I had been erased from my own celebration by people who should have honored me above all others. We'll see each other again, I said carefully, though it may not be in the way you expect. Marcus hugged me next, his 8-year-old arms tight around my waist. I love you, Grandma. I love you too, darling. More than you'll ever know. Daniel and Vanessa stood by the front door, their earlier nervousness having crystallized into something approaching panic. They wanted to leave but were afraid to go, sensing that departure would trigger whatever I had planned but unable to identify the specific threat. Mom, Daniel said, his voice strained with forced casualness. Are you feeling all right? You've been different tonight. I've been myself tonight, Daniel. Perhaps for the first time in years, I've been completely, authentically myself. No performance, no careful management of your feelings, no pretending that your cruelty doesn't matter. We should talk more soon, Vanessa said, her words coming out in a rush. Maybe we could meet for lunch this week? Just the two of us. The offer was transparently motivated by fear rather than affection, but I appreciated the attempt. That's very thoughtful, Vanessa. But I think our conversation tonight has said everything that needed saying. I walked them to the door, playing the gracious hostess to the very end. The cold January air swept into my foyer as I opened it, carrying with it the scent of snow and the promise of winter storms. Drive carefully, I said, the words carrying weight that none of them fully understood yet. The roads can be so dangerous this time of year. You never know when something might go wrong. "Mom, what are you?" Daniel began, but I cut him off with a gentle smile. "I'm simply reminding you to be safe. Family is so precious, so fragile. We never know when we might lose the people we love." I kissed each of them goodbye, the children with genuine affection, Daniel and Vanessa with ceremonial politeness that barely concealed the Arctic cold of my true feelings. "Thank you again for such a lovely evening," I said as they walked toward the garage. "I hope you'll remember it for the rest of your lives." I stood in my doorway, framed by warm light from my beautiful home, watching as they climbed into Daniel's pride and joy. The BMW started with its typical German precision, the engine purring with mechanical confidence. Through the windshield, I could see them having an animated conversation, Daniel gesturing emphatically while Vanessa pointed back toward my house, probably debating whether to come back inside, whether to confront me about my strange behavior, whether they were overreacting to what might have been nothing more than an elderly woman's emotional evening. They would have their answer soon enough. Daniel backed out of my garage with his usual careful attention to detail, the headlights sweeping across my perfectly manicured lawn as he maneuvered toward the street. I raised my hand in a final wave, though I doubted they could see me clearly through the glare of my porch lights. I closed the door and walked to my front window, positioning myself where I could observe their departure without being seen. The BMW paused at the end of my driveway as Daniel checked for oncoming traffic, then pulled smoothly onto the residential street that led to the main road. I checked my watch. 9:23 p.m. By my calculations, they would reach the intersection with Maple Avenue in approximately 4 minutes. The intersection where a steep hill met a busy cross street, where vehicles needed to stop completely before proceeding, where brake systems were put to their most crucial test. I poured myself a glass of the Barolo we had been drinking at dinner and returned to my window. The street was quiet now, lined with houses where other families were settling into their evening routines, unaware that history was being made just outside their doors. At 9:27, I heard it. The sound was distinctive and unmistakable, the sharp screech of tires failing to grip pavement, followed by the grinding noise of mechanical systems pushed beyond their limits. Then came the impact, a sound like thunder that seemed to shake the windows of houses 3 blocks away. I set down my wine glass and closed my eyes, allowing myself a moment of perfect satisfaction. The gift I had given myself was finally unwrapped. When I opened my eyes, I could see the glow of emergency lights in the distance, red and blue strobes painting the winter night in colors of crisis and catastrophe. Soon there would be sirens, ambulances, fire trucks, police cars, all the machinery of tragedy response mobilizing to deal with what would be classified as a mechanical failure accident. I walked upstairs to my bedroom and began preparing for bed with the same meticulous attention to routine that had governed every aspect of my evening. Face cream, hairbrush, silk nightgown, pearl earrings carefully placed in their velvet-lined box. In the mirror, I looked exactly as I had that morning, beautiful, dignified, perfectly composed. The face of a woman who had spent a lovely evening with her family and was now settling into peaceful sleep. Not the face of someone who had just engineered the perfect revenge. As I slipped between my Egyptian cotton sheets, I could hear the distant wail of sirens drawing closer to the intersection where my family had just learned what happened when you made the mistake of treating Imelda Moriarty like a forgettable old woman. The gift I had given myself would keep giving for years to come. Every time they looked at a car, every time they fastened a seatbelt, every time they remembered this night, they would think of me. They would never, ever dismiss me again. I fell asleep to the sound of emergency vehicles, my dreams filled with the memory of their faces when they finally understood that their grandmother was anything but too old to create drama. I was awakened at 6:47 a.m. by the sound of my doorbell ringing persistently, followed by urgent knocking that suggested official business rather than a social call. I took my time getting dressed, selecting a navy wool dress and my mother's pearls with the care of someone preparing for an important performance. When I finally opened the door, I found two police officers on my porch, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a younger woman whose expression was professionally sympathetic. "Mrs. Moriarty? I'm Detective Harrison, and this is Officer Martinez. We're sorry to disturb you so early, but we have some difficult news about your family." I pressed my hand to my chest in the universal gesture of shock, my face arranging itself into an expression of dawning horror. "My family? What's happened? Is someone hurt?" "Ma'am, there was an accident last night. Your son Daniel's vehicle experienced brake failure at the intersection of Maple and Pine. We're very sorry to tell you that there were casualties." "Casualties?" The word came out as a whisper, perfectly pitched to convey a grandmother's worst nightmare beginning to unfold. "Your son and daughter-in-law were killed in the collision, ma'am. The children are alive but seriously injured. They're at Children's Hospital." I let my knees buckle slightly, gripping the doorframe for support with exactly the right amount of theatrical desperation.
No.
"No, that can't be right. They just left here. They were just here for dinner. We had such a lovely evening." "You saw them last night?" Detective Harrison asked, pulling out a notebook. "Yes, they came for dinner. A family dinner. We had been having some difficulties, and I wanted to bring everyone together. To heal old wounds." I let my voice break on the last words, tears beginning to flow with the kind of authentic grief that came from years of suppressed pain rather than immediate loss. "What time did they leave your house?" "Around 9:20, I think. Maybe 9:30. The children had school today, so they didn't want to stay too late." "And how did everyone seem when they left? Any signs of distress or agitation?" I considered this question carefully, knowing that my answer would help shape their understanding of what had happened. "Actually, yes. Daniel and Vanessa seemed unsettled. We had discussed some family issues during dinner. Old grievances. I think they were upset with me for bringing up painful topics." "What kind of topics?" "Oh, you know how families can be. Miscommunications, hurt feelings. I had felt excluded from their Christmas celebration, and I expressed my disappointment. I'm afraid I may have been too direct about my feelings. They left somewhat abruptly." This narrative served multiple purposes. It explained any tension witnesses might have observed, provided a reason for Daniel to have been driving with emotional distraction, and painted me as a concerned grandmother whose only crime was speaking honestly about family dynamics. "Mrs. Moriarty, we'll need to take a formal statement from you later today. But right now, you should know that your grandchildren are asking for you. They're conscious and stable, but they've been through significant trauma." "Of course. Yes, I need to be with them immediately." I gathered my coat and purse with hands that trembled only slightly, the natural reaction of a woman in shock rather than someone fighting to suppress satisfaction. As we drove to the hospital, I listened to the officers discuss the accident in careful, professional terms. "Preliminary investigation suggests complete brake failure," Officer Martinez told me. "These things happen sometimes, even with well-maintained vehicles. Mechanical systems can fail without warning." "How terrible," I murmured. Daniel was so proud of that car. He always said German engineering was the safest in the world. "Unfortunately, no system is completely foolproof," Detective Harrison said. "We'll be conducting a thorough investigation, of course, but early indications point to a tragic mechanical failure." At the hospital, I was escorted to the children's ward where Marcus and Lily lay in adjoining beds, their small bodies dwarfed by medical equipment and bright white bandages. Lily had a broken arm and concussion. Marcus had suffered internal injuries that would require surgery but weren't life-threatening. When they saw me, both children began crying, Not the wails of physical pain, but the devastating sobs of children who had lost their entire world in the space of a few hours. "Grandma," Lily whispered as I approached her bedside. "They said Mommy and Daddy are dead. That can't be true, can it?" I took her uninjured hand in mine, my own tears flowing freely now, genuine tears for two innocent children who had become collateral damage in a war they couldn't understand. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. There was an accident with Daddy's car. Your parents, they didn't survive. But we were all together just last night," Marcus said through his oxygen mask, his 8-year-old logic struggling to process the impossibility of permanent loss. "We had dinner at your house. Everything was normal." "I know, darling. Sometimes terrible things happen very suddenly. But you're going to be okay. I'm going to take care of you now." And I was. Whatever else I had done, whatever justice I had delivered to their ungrateful parents, these children were innocent. They would come home with me. They would be loved and protected and raised with the attention and respect I had been denied. In a twisted way, my gift to myself had become a gift to them as well. Freedom from parents who had been teaching them to dismiss and devalue the people who loved them most. Over the following hours, I played my role perfectly. The grieving mother and grandmother, devastated by sudden loss but determined to be strong for the surviving children. Hospital staff, family friends, and investigators all saw exactly what they expected to see: a woman destroyed by tragedy but rising to meet her responsibilities. No one questioned the mechanical failure that had caused the accident. No one suggested that brake systems in luxury vehicles didn't simply collapse without warning. No one wondered whether the timing of the failure, occurring at the exact moment when maximum braking power was required, was anything more than cruel coincidence. The investigation would be thorough but perfunctory. Mechanical failure accidents, while relatively rare, were well-documented phenomena. Insurance companies would pay out policies, the children would be awarded settlements, and the whole tragedy would be filed away as another reminder of life's fragility. Only I would know the truth, that sometimes the most devastating accidents were the result of very careful planning by someone who had been underestimated once too often. As I sat beside my grandchildren's hospital beds, holding their hands and promising them that everything would be all right, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete satisfaction with my choices. The gift I had given myself would keep giving for the rest of my life. This is what happens when someone pushes a woman past her breaking point: consequences that echo through generations. Are you feeling the complexity of Imelda's actions? The tragedy of innocent children caught in the crossfire of adult cruelty? Drop a comment below about how this story is making you feel. And if you're gripped by this tale, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because we're not done yet. The final chapters will show you the true cost of revenge. 6 weeks after the accident, the carefully constructed facade of my grief began to show hairline fractures that threatened to expose the truth beneath. The children had come home with me, as I had always known they would. Social services had conducted their perfunctory interviews, finding nothing objectionable about a loving grandmother taking in her orphaned grandchildren. My house was beautiful, my financial resources adequate, and my devotion to Marcus and Lily obvious to anyone who cared to look. What they couldn't see was the growing weight of guilt that had settled on my chest like a stone, making it difficult to breathe during the quiet moments when I was alone with my thoughts. The children were healing, physically and emotionally, with the resilience that seemed unique to the young. They asked fewer questions about their parents now, accepted my explanations about accidents and fate with the trust children reserve for the adults who care for them. They had adapted to their new routines, their new bedrooms, their new life with Grandma with remarkable grace. But Lily, at 10, was old enough to remember details that made me increasingly uncomfortable. "Grandma," she said one evening as I tucked her into bed, "why were you so sad at dinner that night?" "What do you mean, sweetheart?" The night of the accident. You seemed different. Sadder, but also, I don't know, like you were saying goodbye. My hands stilled on her blanket. I was sad because I felt like your parents didn't appreciate having me in their lives. Sometimes adults have complicated feelings that are hard to explain. But you gave us those pictures. Like you wanted us to remember something special. I wanted you to remember that I love you. That I've always loved your family, even when it felt like that love wasn't returned. She studied my face with the intensity that had always made her seem older than her years. Daddy's car was fine when we got in it, wasn't it? I imagine so, darling. Sometimes things break without warning. That's what makes accidents so frightening. The policeman said the brakes stopped working right when Daddy needed them most. At the bottom of the hill. That was very bad timing, yes. Grandma, do brakes usually break at the worst possible moment? The question hung in the air between us, like an accusation wrapped in childhood innocence. I smoothed her hair back from her forehead, buying time to compose my response. Sometimes fate is cruel that way, Lily. Sometimes terrible things happen at exactly the wrong time, and we never understand why. Do you think Daddy and Mommy are angry at us for living with you now? The question pierced through my defenses like a blade finding its mark. Why would you think that? Because they didn't really like it when we came here for dinner. Mommy always complained about it afterwards. And Daddy said you were too old to understand modern families. Too old. Even in death, Daniel's casual cruelty continued to wound. Your parents loved you very much, I said carefully. Whatever they thought about me, they wanted you to be safe and happy. I think they would be glad to know you're being taken care of. But even as I spoke the words, I could see doubt flickering in Lily's eyes. She was beginning to piece together fragments of memory, beginning to question the convenient timing of events, beginning to wonder about coincidences that seemed too perfect to be accidental. The next morning brought a visit from Detective Harrison, who had continued checking on us periodically since the accident. He found me in my kitchen, preparing the children's breakfast with a kind of domestic perfection that had defined my entire adult life. Mrs. Moriarty, I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I wanted to see how you and the children were adjusting. That's very thoughtful, Detective. Coffee, please. He accepted the cup I offered and settled into one of my kitchen chairs with the weary ease of someone who had delivered too much bad news to too many families. The final accident report will be released next week, he said. I thought you should know what to expect. Has anything changed from your initial findings? Not substantially. Complete brake failure caused by a combination of factors. Normal wear, cold weather affecting fluid viscosity, and what appears to have been a small leak in the brake line that developed suddenly. I nodded sympathetically, though my pulse quickened at his words. A leak in the brake line. Had they found evidence of my modifications, or were they simply describing the natural result of the damage I had carefully inflicted? The insurance investigators were particularly thorough, Detective Harrison continued. Given the size of the policy payouts involved, they wanted to rule out any possibility of irregularities. Irregularities. Sabotage. Intentional damage. That sort of thing. He studied my face carefully as he spoke. But they found no evidence of tampering. The failure pattern was consistent with mechanical wear and environmental factors. I see. I kept my voice steady, though inside I felt a surge of satisfaction. My research and planning had been thorough enough to fool even insurance investigators motivated to find evidence of fraud. There is one thing that's been bothering me, though, Detective Harrison said, his tone becoming more casual in a way that immediately put me on alert. What's that? The timing. Your son left your house at approximately 9:20, correct? Yes, that sounds right. And the accident occurred at 9:27. So they had been driving for exactly 7 minutes. I suppose so. I hadn't thought about it in those terms. It's just that 7 minutes is barely enough time to reach that intersection from your house. Unless they were driving unusually fast. My mouth went dry. Perhaps they were in a hurry to get the children home. School night, you know. Perhaps. Or perhaps they stopped somewhere along the way. Stopped where? That's what I can't figure out. There's really nowhere to stop between your house and that intersection. No gas stations, no shops, nothing that would require a quick errand. I felt the first genuine spike of fear I had experienced since this whole plan had begun. Maybe they drove slowly? Daniel was always very careful about speed limits in residential areas. Maybe. Detective Harrison finished his coffee and stood to leave. I'm probably overthinking it. Grief makes us look for patterns that aren't really there, explanations for things that don't need explaining. Grief can be very disorienting, I agreed. Indeed it can. Well, thank you for the coffee, Mrs. Moriarty. Please give my regards to the children. After he left, I sat at my kitchen table staring at my reflection in the window, wondering if the detective's questions were routine follow-up or the beginning of something more dangerous. That evening, as I helped Marcus with his homework, Lily appeared in the doorway of my study with a photograph in her hand. Grandma, I found this in my backpack from that night. She handed me a school photo, the kind children exchanged with friends at the end of the semester. But this one had writing on the back in Lily's careful script, "For Grandma, who loves us even when other people don't. Thank you for the best dinner ever. January 15th. January 15th. The date of our family dinner. The date of the accident. The date Lily had apparently decided was important enough to commemorate before she even knew why. When did you write this, sweetheart? That night, before we left your house. While you were getting our coats. I wanted to give you something to remember the evening, since you seemed so sad about Christmas." I stared at the photograph, at the date written in a 10-year-old's handwriting, and realized that I was holding evidence of premeditation that I had never intended to create. Evidence that my own granddaughter had inadvertently created, documenting her awareness that something significant was happening that night. Evidence that Detective Harrison would find very interesting if he ever had reason to search my house. For the first time since Christmas Eve, I felt the cold touch of genuine fear. The perfect crime was beginning to develop very imperfect complications. Spring arrived early that year, filling my garden with unseasonable blooms that seemed to mock the winter that had settled permanently in my heart. I sat in my conservatory on a warm April morning, watching Marcus and Lily play in the backyard that had once been their father's playground, and tried to reconcile the woman I had become with the woman I thought I was. 6 months had passed since the accident, and the investigation had been officially closed. Detective Harrison's final report concluded that mechanical failure, combined with unfortunate timing and road conditions, had resulted in a tragic accident that could not have been predicted or prevented. The insurance companies had paid out their policies without challenge. The children's trust funds were secure, their futures financially protected. By every measurable standard, my plan had been a complete success. So, why did I feel like I was drowning in the aftermath of my own victory? The answer lay in watching these two innocent children rebuild their lives under my care. Lily, now more perceptive than ever, sometimes asked questions that made my chest tighten with guilt. Marcus, resilient as only children can be, had begun to blossom in ways he never had under his parents' critical eye. That evening, Detective Harrison called with news that both relieved and terrified me. "Mrs. Moriarty, I wanted to let you know we're officially closing the case files. But I need to tell you something. I know what really happened that night." My blood turned to ice, but Harrison continued. "I also know that those children are thriving under your care in ways they never did before. Sometimes justice comes in forms the law can't prosecute. This case stays closed." 2 years later, I stand in my garden watching Marcus and Lily help me harvest roses. They've grown into kind, Empathetic children who rescue injured birds instead of ignoring them, who value compassion over achievement. In seeking revenge against Daniel and Vanessa, I had inadvertently saved these children from becoming the cruel, dismissive people their parents were molding them to be. They would never laugh at someone's pain or treat their elders as irrelevant. The gift I gave myself was justice. But the gift I gave them was transformation, and that has proven far more precious than any satisfaction my revenge provided. Some gifts require terrible prices. Some love demands unthinkable sacrifices. And sometimes being a good grandmother means being a terrible mother-in-law. I sleep peacefully now, surrounded by children who know they are valued for who they are, not what they achieve. The only ghosts that visit me are echoes of laughter from people who once dismissed me as too old to matter. They were wrong. I was never too old to create drama. I was simply too experienced to create it carelessly. And that's the complexity of justice. Sometimes saving innocent lives requires taking guilty ones. Imelda didn't just get revenge. She rescued 2 children from becoming the kind of people who destroy others with their cruelty. If this story made you think about the price of justice and the weight of consequences, hit that like button and share it with someone who understands that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is the most terrible. Remember, your story isn't over. You still have chapters left to write, and you still have the power to choose what kind of ending you want. Until next time, keep writing your own powerful story. And don't forget to check out Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain in the description, because sometimes the best revenge is living a life so beautiful that your enemies become irrelevant.